We've got some breaking news, my friends. Nintendo is now officially working on a brand new Switch 2 piece of hardware, and it is most likely going to be some type of Switch 2 Lite. Now, to be clear, this does not come from Nintendo themselves. This comes from a very astute person who is a big Nintendo fan, Sky. Sky says on Blue Sky, funny enough, "I think I've discovered something interesting, but I have no idea what it implies. On Nintendo's account portal, there is an unused model code under the name OSM. The Switch 2's model code is BEE. The portal has images for each Switch model, and requesting OSM returns an image of a Switch 2. In the code of the website itself, it does in fact say OSM. Then if you click on the OSM portion of this tweet itself and you request an image from that OSM, it gives you this, a Switch 2 Lite. And that is just insane to me. I cannot believe this has slipped through the cracks for this long. Now, there are a few very important things to go over before we discuss what this could mean and why Nintendo is developing a new console this soon into the Switch 2's life. Number one, we need to look at these buttons here on the left side. For the Nintendo Switch Lite, there was a D-pad, and here we see that they're not using a D-pad for this model. At the very least, this model does not include a D-pad, it's just the 4-button layout that we see on regular Joy-Con. Number two, on the right side of this Joy-Con, we can see there is no capture button, and there also is no C button. On top of all of that, the bezels are a little bit too thick in my opinion. The black portion of this screen just looks a little bit too thick. The Switch 2 has very dramatically decreased the amount of size that those bezels have, and I feel like this just doesn't look quite right to me. Now, of course, this model could just very well be something that they are using internally as a placeholder, something that could very much be not at all what the final product looks like for this console, but it is still worth noting to say that this doesn't look entirely legitimate in my opinion. I'm not trying to say that this person is being malicious in any way. I am trying to say that this is a little bit off. There is something wrong here with this console. Now, I definitely think that it would be updated, and like I said, it could be some type of placeholder for the company, but at the same time, it does look a little bit weird. At the same time, on top of all of that, Nintendo absolutely should be developing a Switch 2 Lite, and I would be more than happy to see it coming this year. Some people are already complaining that Nintendo is moving on to another piece of hardware that would alternate from the original Switch 2. I think that's absolutely ridiculous because this essentially is Nintendo dropping the price. What is the biggest problem with Nintendo right now? What is the biggest problem in the industry and the gaming overall landscape? Pricing. The RAM problems, the shortages with all these different chips, the prices are going up and the consumer interest is going down. Prices are becoming way too high for so many people, and buying something like video games just isn't in the cards for many. And so while Nintendo could make it a lot more appealing to buy a Switch 2 by releasing a new 3D Mario, Zelda, Smash, all that stuff, that would really help drive the sales of the console, what also would help people go out and buy another console is simply having this Switch 2 Lite be much cheaper. Having a cheaper alternative to a $450 base system with no game included is incredibly smart on Nintendo's part. Now, at launch, the Nintendo Switch was $300, and then a couple years later, in June of 2019, they released a Lite system that was $200, so $100 less. And $200 to get into the Nintendo Switch ecosystem was a steal of a deal. You could never play it in docked mode because it didn't come with the dock, it didn't have that part of it, and it didn't remove the Joy-Cons themselves, so you were stuck playing single player. And if that was something that wasn't a big deal for you, then boom, you cut $100 off right there, and boom, all these amazing games were at your disposal. I feel like the Switch 2 can absolutely benefit from having something like that, having something way cheaper for people to get invested much quicker. But what would that price point even look like for someone to think it is affordable? Well, the Switch sold like hotcakes at $300, and if you see $450 for the Switch 2, $350 for a Switch 2 Lite is pretty good of a deal, I think. The only issue that I might take with that is that Nintendo retroactively raised the price of the Nintendo Switch to $350 last year in response to a lot of tariffs and RAM issues and all that, like we've talked about many times on this channel and in the past. The Switch being the exact same price as the Switch 2 Lite, I don't know, something about that seems weird to me. Like, I'm sure they would do it if that's what it cost, if that's what it really was, but something about that feels weird, to have a regular Nintendo Switch that you could go out, buy, actually switch, actually be able to dock onto your TV and play all these other games. The Switch 2 Lite not having that feels odd to me, but I suppose that's the price you would have to pay to get into 4K gaming, 60 FPS gaming. 120 FPS we know the Switch 2 is capable of running in handheld mode. I would be very surprised to see the Switch Lite running any worse than that. I feel like it would be the same type of screen that we got on the Switch 2, the only difference being no dock, no removable Joy-Con, and no extra padding to have to ship out there to all these extra consumers and retailers. It just kind of cuts out that middleman for them and have to be able to cut down a lot of pricing. So yes, it's a great deal for the consumer, great deal for anyone wanting to buy, helps out Nintendo a lot by pushing another console out there, gives more people options overall, and they probably won't even have to worry about a lot of graphical restrictions. Third parties will probably suffer the most from this because I think people buying it won't have as much graphical fidelity on the actual handheld model itself. If you dock a game like Persona 3 Reload, it goes up to 60 FPS, but in handheld it is still 30 FPS even after the patch, which on a console that in handheld mode can give you up to 120, 30 FPS is kind of gross. It feels really bad. So we talked about some of the pros, some of the cons. Let's talk about it from Nintendo's point of view. Back in 2017, they launched the Nintendo Switch. They had just pushed it across the finish line, and it felt like they kind of stumbled with the hardware a little bit. Everything prior to the Switch had been known for its huge amount of quality and just the amount of time and effort that Nintendo had put into developing those consoles to make them bug-proof, to make them the best they could possibly be, and make them almost indestructible. We've talked many times on this channel about the Game Boy that actually survived a bombing and still worked. The Nintendo Switch felt like if you dropped it the wrong way or looked at it or even sneezed at it, something would go wrong. The Joy-Con would start drifting, there would be issues with it, and that was because they had to rush it out. They had to get the Switch on the market as fast as possible because the Wii U was a huge failure, and everyone knew that the Nintendo Switch was so much more higher of potential, had a higher ceiling, and was even better than anything the Wii U could have offered. That is why I think many people were a little bit surprised to see 2019 be the year that a new edition of this console came out, rather than a Pro model like people were talking about. People were saying, oh, the Switch had a lot of issues, the drift, the battery life could be a little bit better, so we need a Pro model to make the graphics a little bit better, the screen a little bit better, make everything better. And then they gave us a worse version of the Switch, and people were like, what are you doing? Why would you give us a Switch that can't switch? It doesn't even make sense. That was the big thing, right? People were like, a Lite doesn't make sense. Why would you give us a Switch that can't switch? Well, they did it, and it sold like hotcakes, and it worked for that consumer, that type that wanted to pay a little bit less and get into that ecosystem with ease. I think it's the same thing here, but even more pressing for Nintendo here in the big 2026. Last year, the Nintendo Switch 2 launched about a year after many people thought it was going to release, which was 2024. Reports and rumors came out that said that Nintendo was trying to build up stock for the Switch 2 so that way people could go out and buy as many consoles as they want, and it simply wouldn't matter. It would never go out of sale. And of course, it didn't. A lot of people were still able to buy Switches all year long last year when it launched, and up to this point, you could still go out to a random Target, random GameStop, and on your second or third trip, you'd probably still find a Switch 2 out there. Even on your first one, I think you would. But with the news of the holidays being a little bit down for Nintendo, with them not selling as many Switch 2s as they probably would have liked, and the video game industry just going down in sales overall, I think Nintendo knows what the problem is, and they know, sure, they could give us more big games. They told us in the investment that they're missing a big Western audience title, but the biggest problem right now is pricing. Everyone knows it. So what they were going to do in 2024, if they would have released it and then give us a Lite model towards the end of 26 or the summer of 26, they decided, you know what? We have had so much time to develop this model, to develop this console. Let's give it another year to build up some stock, make sure all the bugs are fixed, make sure this is a truly Nintendo seal of quality product, and then the next year we'll hit them with the Lite that's even cheaper. I honestly think that they had to have known. They had to have known that people weren't going to be happy with these price models, with the pricing that they gave us, because they didn't tell us about it. I've said it many times, but in the Switch presentation back in 2017, within the first 5 minutes of that presentation, they told us $300. That was it. Boom. Full transparency. $300. They gave us the pricing for the games afterwards to be $60, which made a ton of sense. And then into the Switch 2 generation, what did they do? They hid it from us. They lacked in communication. The PR was very poor, in my opinion. They gave us an entire hour of Switch 2 information, Switch 2 games, told us all this stuff, and didn't tell us a single bit about this price point. They didn't tell us how much the Switch 2 was going to cost, how much Donkey Kong would cost, how much Mario Kart would end up costing, and it's because they knew. They decided, you know what, we're going to hide it from them. We're going to put it out right after the Direct, how much it is for pre-orders and such, and then they'll have to figure it out themselves. What did that do? It led to misinformation. It led to anger. People still believe Mario Kart is $100 physical, $90 digital. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. And they knew it. They just took the wrong approach, in my opinion. But what that does say is that they knew it was going to be expensive. They knew it was going to be a problem, and they knew to counteract that problem, they would give us a product to kind of ease that worry, ease that amount of money. And let's be clear, $350 is still pretty expensive. That was about as much as the OLED model was at launch. But I think if parents are going to stores, if your average gamer goes to a store and they see the PS5 at $550, $450. If they see the Xbox at $600, they're going to look over at the Nintendo Switch and say $450 for a Switch, I don't know. $400, $350 for a Switch 2? Absolutely. Compared to the Xbox, compared to the PlayStation 5, over $200 cheaper to get into pretty much the same type of ecosystem with even better first-party exclusives, in my opinion. You're getting a better deal there. Now here's the thing, right? We don't know how long this has been there. It's probably been in the code of this website for a long time. And I really truly don't know how this works, how you take that OSM, how you end up getting an image. I don't know. But if that image is legit, if they didn't make it up, if this truly is some sort of placeholder, then we truly don't know how long it's been there, or if that even means that we're getting a Switch 2 Lite anytime soon. But I would hedge my bets on that coming sooner rather than later because of all the reasons I just mentioned. 2026 feels like the year for a Switch 2 Lite, and I feel so stupid for not predicting it sooner. I mean, if you think back to 2017, 2018, 2019, as much as they had to rush out the Nintendo Switch, it only took them 2 full years to get the Switch Lite out there. So now if they had so much more time to prepare, to plan, to make everything more according to what they wanted to do, the Switch 2 Lite coming out this year, a year after, makes total sense. It really helped boost sales in 2019 for the Switch when it was not struggling, but was getting over the hump of the Wii U days. And now I think it's going to help the Switch 2 get over that hump and kind of survive a lot of this RAM issues. And unfortunately, I think this is going to be something that Nintendo points to when the Switch 2 does eventually raise in price, because the RAM issues are too big for them to ignore. If they're going to raise it up to $500 for the Switch 2 console, giving us a $350 or $400 Switch 2 Lite is going to be their way of saying, hey, we have a cheaper model. You don't have to buy a regular Switch 2. You don't have to. It's out of our control. These market conditions are not something that we can do. All we can do is react to them. Which of course is true, but also kind of baloney because they have so much money they could absolutely swallow that cost until RAM gets back to normal. The development of RAM is actually increasing right now, so within a year or two, eventually RAM prices will go back down as that quantity overwhelms the amount of people that are looking to buy. But for now, the Switch 2 is going to be a little bit more expensive than people might think. That price increase will probably come around the same time that the Switch 2 Lite gets announced, so that way Nintendo can say, hey, we have a cheaper model, go out there and buy that instead, and it will make sense for a lot of people to splurge on a cheaper console, especially if it launches alongside some big game like a 3D Mario. If you get a new Pokemon game this year and you get a new Switch 2 Lite, boy oh boy is that going to be worth it, because not only is there going to be a big game this year for people to really sink their teeth into and say, finally, a reason to get a Switch 2, but also they can look and say, hey, now I can get it for cheaper. Now I can get a Switch 2 Lite alongside of this brand new game. Bada bing, bada boom. Nintendo makes more money, the fans are happier, and people overall can't complain as much because now there's a cheaper way to get into these games, to get into this ecosystem. So that's the news. That's what I think is going on behind the scenes with Nintendo and how I think it could affect the market moving forward. Let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think about all this? Is it too soon? Is it not soon enough? How soon can you get yourself a Switch 2 Lite? And are you interested? If you're a Nintendo fan with a Switch that hasn't splurged on the Switch 2 yet, would you absolutely go out there and buy a Switch Lite? Let me know all your thoughts and more down below. Make sure you subscribe and like today's video if you enjoyed. Click that notification bell to make sure you know exactly when all my videos release, and consider joining my membership program, just a couple bucks a month, to help support me as a content creator and get a couple cool perks for yourself. Make sure you click on the left side of your screen to see my review on Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and click on the right side of your screen to see the end of year videos, including my predictions, wish lists, rankings video, all that. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Make sure you have yourself a phenomenal day. This has been Ray's Nintendo Talk. I have been Ray, and I will see you all in the next video.